The hell?
Well,
That's not working.
I think not. No.
Am I on the wrong video conference call?
It's possible.
Possible. But that Point Malate Rising is a great one. Let's watch that again. I want to.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll get started.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn the video so we can say hello.
Yeah. How long is it? Does it say? Oh, 1 minute, 19 seconds.
There's a choice in front of us all. It lies at the essence of what it means to be a conscious human. Our environment is being ravaged and destroyed, and our homes are getting hotter and dirtier and more unsafe. A few sacred places remain, but few are at our doorstep, like Point Malate. Rich with green valleys, sweeping eelgrass meadows, and towering old growth. Home to osprey, pipevine swallowtails, and needlegrass. The landscape is truly wild and alive. But this place is being stolen from us as we lie sleeping in our beds. A powerful few have combined powers and subjugated democracy. Everyone loses in this deal. We deserve to make this gem of the Richmond shoreline a people's park, not some collection of multi-million-dollar ranchettes for the privileged few. Let's take Richmond back. Stand up and fight for conservation, for community, for Point Malate.
All right.
Very good.
Welcome. It's 7 o'clock. So I hope everyone is doing well today. We've only got 15 people on, huh?
It's up against the Giants-Dodgers game.
No. That's why I wore my Giant shirt, see? No.
Oh, well, I'm good. Well, I'm watching the score on my cell phone, so,
Okay.
Go.
All right. Well, we'll get started anyway. These are the hardcore people here tonight. So good evening and welcome to the 6th class of the Bay Advocacy Program for 2021. Thank you for the feedback I got. A lot of people that went on the tour to Point Malate really enjoyed it. And we had a few technical problems online, but we got a lot out of it as well, watching on Zoom. So thank you to Virginia, to Jim, to Sally, to Myrna, and all the other people that helped put that together. So tonight, we're going to have a webinar video on nature-based adaptation case studies. And that's by Jeremy Lowe of the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And then we'll do a breakout sessions that'll give you the chance to read the statement that you've written with the Richmond City Council in mind on the Point Malate, on preserving Point Malate.
I'm doing something little low.
And then Virginia's going to give us a little bit of an update on that project and so a little bit of new information on that. And then we'll have a presentation by James Eggers on persuasive writing and use of media in environmental advocacy. And then the last thing we'll do is we have a video on carbon sequestration studies on wetlands, which is very interesting. So I guess we'll start with the first webinar video. So let me screen share. I've got the links on here. Okay.
Not seeing anything, Susan. Are we supposed to be seeing something?
Yeah, you should. You're not
No.
seeing it?
No, just a gray screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a bluish green, I think, that little fabric there.
Hold on.
You can post the score in chat occasionally.
Okay, well, we're at zip right now, so you know, like.
Because I see that most of us are here. We're 27 of us.
Well,
Okay. Okay, it should be optimized.
We're seeing your screen.
I know, I put all the links in one spot
Okay.
so I could get to them instead of looking in email.
Mm-hmm. Well, that didn't work. We're still seeing your the class course.
Hmm. Well,
And back to the gray screen. Okay, back to the class course.
Do you want to
hold on.
try making one of us a host and we could try sharing?
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Sure.
Virginia, you want to try that?
Oof, I'll do my best.
You did a good job on Point Malate. Just keep going.
Oof.
Okay, stop share.
it's really weird, you know.
How many people ultimately went on the Point Malate? 25?
We had 20.
Okay. And then there were how many online, Susan?
About a dozen.
Okay, so that's 32. That's quite a bit. Quite a few people.
So Virginia, I switched you to host.
Okay. And let me see. Could you message me that link and then I'll give it my best shot? Or chat me that, perhaps?
Okay.
Sorry for the hiccups here. I was just in another Zoom and I don't think we got started for about first 10, 15 minutes while we were sorting out how to get everyone going.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here.
The field trip was great for those of us who were watching online. It was very long because it went on and on for about two and a half hours.
Yeah, well, it was good to dive into. All right, can folks see this? See?
Yes, we can see it.
Gentlemen, and let me know if you can hear it when I press play.
Okay. We can't hear it. We can't hear it, and that's because you have to push some particular button, like Susan will tell you on the right-hand lower corner, there's a button that you have to push or something.
Sorry about that.
Susan, do you have any more?
There's some kind of a button for share audio too, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
But it's part of Zoom. It's not.
Samantha Smith says he knows Jeff Morris. She knows Jeff Morris.
Oh, we
I
love
hope
Jeff.
you do.
Let's see. Or is anybody who has done this before on?
So when you screen share, there's a button on the bottom or the lower left corner that says optimize for video.
Oh, I
But
see.
I'm not sure if
Optimize
that's-
for video clip. I see
Yeah.
that. Okay, and then
Yeah,
share. And then if I press play here.
Your presentation. And
Oh, great.
Are you
the floor
Right here.
hearing it? All right.
Yeah.
Here we
Yes,
go.
my name is Jeremy
Thank you.
Lowe. I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco S Institute, and I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about nature and nature-based adaptation for the shoreline. In this, we're talking about some new innovative ideas, such as oyster reefs that are experimental in nature and are being piloted in some areas. But in other areas, we're looking at old and tried efforts such as marsh restoration, whose value we are now looking in a new light. The talk is split between adaptation using nature, such as marshes and mudflats, and nature-based features, which are things which we build to emulate nature, such as ecotone slopes. But we are also interested in maintaining these marshes and allowing them to adapt over time. So it's not just building things, we need to reestablish and maintain natural and nature-based hydraulic and sediment processes as well. And we're doing that in a unique place. We're doing that in an urbanized estuary. This is a picture of Coleman Creek, and it's a reminder that we have both nature and development hand in hand. In the past, nature and development were neighbors, and projects tended to be relatively siloed, have a single benefit, such as wildlife support for a restoration. But now project goals need to be more wide-ranging. We're having to adapt both the natural and the man-made environment to climate change, to environmental changes. And we also need to recognize that there are a lot of other benefits we get from nature, which we don't always recognize, such as flood management and carbon sequestration. So moving ahead, our projects are going to be much more multi-benefit. And that's what I'd like to talk about, is how can we benefit both the built environment and nature moving ahead without losing sight of those kernel goals of restoring a bay and maintaining those ecological benefits. When we look at the bay, we see a very close connection between the urban and nature. This is the port of Redwood City, and you can see on the right-hand side the port and a highly urbanized frontage. And on the left, on the side of the picture, you can see Bear Island, recently restored marsh area, which has great value. But you can see how close physically they are in proximity to each other, but they're also very close vertically. They are very low-lying areas. Obviously, a marsh is low-lying, it allows the tide in, but they are also, the port is very low-lying as well. And if it wasn't for levees, if it wasn't for some of the fill that's been placed in there, those areas would be underwater every tide. And that's a common theme we have around the bay. Many of the areas that we've restored are former diked baylands. Historically, they would get wet, and they were the former marshes. That's a great place to start doing the restorations. But we've also built our cities, our communities, our infrastructure in the same types of land, which are very low-lying. So moving ahead, whatever we do in terms of restoration, whatever we do in terms of managing the ecological values of the bay are going to be intimately linked with managing the built environment and making sure we're protecting the communities that are surrounding the bay. And so to that end, in 2019, we developed a SFEI, an adaptation atlas. And that's something that Julie Beagle talked about, I think, in one of the first of this series. And here we tried to lay out the opportunities that we had for nature and natural-based features to support the adaptation of the whole bay, of the whole of this urbanized bay, and how they could be incorporated into strategies to increase the resilience of the bay in all its forms to a changing climate, and in particular to rising seas. And so this is freely available. There's a web link in the bottom left-hand corner, and I think that will also be posted on the website later. And what we did, we looked at measures that would both help the natural baylands adapt to sea level rise, but also help managing future flooding of urban areas. What we were trying to do was to avoid the situation where we had a lot of hard infrastructure being built relatively quickly to protect areas which might have detrimental consequences to the natural environment. So this adaptation atlas lists out a whole series of measures, and this is like a cookbook. We had all sorts of structural things that we could build, reefs, submerged aquatic vegetation. I think Marilyn Latta talked about this last week. Beaches, which Roger Leventhal has been talking about. We talked about tidal marshes and the role of those, ecotone levees, the long slopes adjacent to levees, looking for migration space, looking for areas where wetlands could move into as sea levels rose. A whole lot of different measures there. What we also looked at were things that from the regulatory and the financial and the policy point of view, which particularly made space for nature. Nature isn't as efficient in reducing flooding or reducing waves as a vertical wall, as a levee. It tends to take a lot more space, and space, obviously, in an urban estuary is a bit of a premium. So we did focus on both those areas. Obviously, that then takes the realm of planning beyond just what the restoration or what the levee would look like or what the marsh would look like into a discussion about the land uses around the bay. And that's something we tried to bring into the conversation about for the future management of the bay itself. We also recognize that not everything works everywhere, that the bay is full of unique landscape, and we need to think appropriate in different areas. In the North Bay and the South Bay, we have these large, flat, open areas where a lot of the salt ponds were constructed. We have different wave climates in those areas to maybe along the marine shoreline, which is much steeper and rocky and has little small headlands. So we were looking to suggest what was appropriate. And so we set up dividing the bay into 30 operational landscape units, and defined by natural settings, and such as the slope of the land, the width of the mudflats, the location of headlands, exposure to waves. And we use these to characterize the types of wetlands we found here, and also the types of issues that might be needed to be addressed. The types of development, and particularly in those large flat areas in the South Bay, where we have a lot of high-tech companies down there, a lot of infrastructure next to the bay, is quite different from the North Bay, where we've got a lot of agricultural land, although we do have roads and rail running through the middle of that. So we tried to step back, look at the bay, see what the issues were. But in doing that, we also needed to understand what the goal of the projects would be. In the past, we've looked specifically at restoration. We look at putting back marshes and connecting to the watersheds where we could. But now we're also thinking about how does that benefit the built community. So before determining the types of measures that we really need, we need to ask some questions. We need to ask really, what are we trying to achieve with the restoration with this? Are we looking solely at, what are the restoration opportunities we have here? What are the marshes, the connections to the creeks that we could have? But then also thinking about what are the hazards that the built environment has at these same places? And what are the risks and how valuable are those areas? So how could we incorporate both the restorations and the adaptations together? And then thinking about, well, what if we understand there's a risk, if we understand there's a risk from flooding, we understand maybe there's erosion, where do marshes and beaches make sense in either helping to solve the problem, but also where they make sense in their natural setting? You can't just build a beach anywhere. You need to think about where a beach could be sustained and would fit into the natural system. The same with marshes. Everything is set with a very specific elevations, with very specific space requirements. And you also got to think about what's behind and what's in front. If you've got a steep drop off, then having a marsh is difficult because you really need a mudflat in front of it. And what's behind, if you have a nice transition zone, but it transitions into a road or a built area, you've got to think of something different. And then again, we've got to think about how long are these things going to last? We know that the environment is going to be changing considerably over time. We can see sea level rising. We understand temperatures are changing. So how effective and how long will these different landscapes last? And how will they evolve, and can we give them space and opportunities to evolve? And then also thinking about how we combine these with levees and seawalls and so on, the more traditional approaches, because we are always going to need those in some places, and we're going to need hybrid sort of solutions to these. So in doing this, our tidal goal, our marshes goals, is really set out by things like the Bayland Goals project and in 2015, which kind of lays out a clear plan of where restorations could occur. So we're very well organized in the restoration side of things. On the landward side of things, it's more difficult because there's lots of different ways people can get flooded. So we have storms, we have sea level rise, which we've already talked about, but then we also got to think about the water coming from the watersheds through rainfall and trying to get down to the bay. We have potentially rising groundwater as well. As sea level rises, there may be a connection between the groundwater and flooding behind the levee. We need to think about marsh edge erosion and land subsidence as things go up and down and move. So erosion and changes in the land as well as in the water is important. And we've got to think about our marshes, and they will keep up with sea level rise. They will change, but we've got to give them the sediment to do that. So all of these things come together to change the flood risk. And we're really trying to start to think about how would we mesh together the restorations with these types of understanding of these different changes. And so when we're thinking about the changes and thinking about future development and what we need to do for those areas, we also need to think about what pairing the types of issues, measures that we might take with different problems. So if potentially one problem is wave overtopping, then we need to have natural features which will reduce the wave overtopping. And a beach is a great example of that. Another example is a marsh. A marsh, as waves cross over the vegetation and the energy is taken out of the wave, it reduces the size of the wave. These are great ways of doing things. But we need to identify what the problem is first. We wouldn't necessarily want to build a beach in a certain area if it wasn't trying to solve a problem. Then the same with combined flooding, the flooding that comes down from the watershed, that's usually because of loss of floodplain as it goes through the cities. So thinking about how to set back the levees and creating more natural floodplains is another way to move forward. So matching the problem with the measure is key to do. So I'm now going to go through the different types of features that we have. And I'm going to start with natural. Natural are things like marshes, things like beaches, things that would exist in the bay already and which we can make better use of. And one of the problems we have is that we've diked off a lot of these baylands, the historical marshes. And you can go around the whole bay. And this is an example from Las Galinas in Marin. On the left is a Google image of the area. You got Las Galinas Creek and Hamilton at the northern end, and on the right is an elevation map. It's rather jarring colors, but it basically shows the zones of elevation, and the zones are the green, and in the middle is at sort of the marsh elevation. That's the highest elevation on this map. And the reds, the oranges and the browns are mudflats and shallow subtidal. So on the right of this map is the bay, and you would expect to see mudflats and shallow subtidal in those areas. But you can also see to the left, the area behind the marsh, landward of the marsh, is also brown and orange. So these are subsided areas which have been cut off from the bay by levees. And these are typical around the bay. We have these deep subsided areas cut off from the bay for maybe 100 years or so, which have subsided. They've been diked and drained and subsided. And so these, if you didn't have the levees, these would get flooded every tide. And so these are an issue. We've got to keep the levees up to keep the water out so that we can maintain what we're doing with them. If we don't want them anymore and we let the levees breach, then we end up with large ponds of water and large amounts of water moving around the landscape. So somehow we have to manage these. And we call these polders. These are dike baylands or polders, which are deeply subsided areas, manage the areas. And that's going to be a common theme in our management of these areas. So in this cross section, you can see quite often, this is where we had the opportunity to restore marshes. These are very easy to restore to a marsh. They're deeply subsided, but if you can fill them with sediment, which we have done in a number of places, you can create marsh relatively quickly in a few decades, as opposed to the hundreds of years that normally would take to do. If you're going to maintain them, then you've got to maintain the berm or the levee that surrounds it. And quite often we've actually developed these areas, so you have to maintain them with a flood risk management levee as well. So we've got some choices to make in this area, and this may be somewhere where obviously restoration and shoreline management really does fit hand in glove. An example of this is the Hamilton Airfield marsh restoration in just by Novato. This is a 600 or so acre restoration by the Corps of Engineers and the Coastal Conservancy. It is formerly an airfield, and which was then cleaned up and then filled with about 5.5 million cubic yards of dredge material from the Port of Oakland. And that raised the elevation and it speeded the conversion of this dike bayland, of this polder, to tidal marsh habitat. In doing that, of course, you can't let the bay go all the way in. There's people's houses in there as well. There's other infrastructure to protect. So you always, with a restoration, you have a setback levee. So hand in hand with the restoration, we have a setback levee. So we retreat the bay shore landward and we fill it up and we create marsh. I mean, that's generally the process that we've been doing for the last 40 years. So we have a huge amount of experience of doing this. But when we look at new areas around the bay and we think of places like Sonoma Baylands, then which is, I think many people will be familiar with. This is a vast expanse of salt ponds, which a lot have been restored on the Napa side by the Coastal Conservancy. On the Sonoma side, they tended to be, they're still levied off, many of them, used for agriculture, or they're in the they're in the control of the Fish and Wildlife Service and ready for restoration, but they're still diked areas. But sort of right in the middle of all this is Highway 37, which you can see the ribbon running across the North Bay here. And that acts as a very low-lying road. It is like the canary in the coal mine of sea level rise for the bay. It does get flooded occasionally now. In 2017, it was closed for a couple of weeks. It's a regular threat. And so thinking about this landscape and the restoration potential, you've got to think about Highway 37 and its issues on here. And we're trying to think about both as we move forward. So looking ahead, the Sonoma Land Trust have recently completed a bayland strategy for this area, and this map on the right-hand side shows the relative elevation. The blue would be basically underwater if we took the levees down. So these are the deeply subsided polders. And the greens and the browns, they're getting higher up to marsh elevation and then beyond. So you can see from north to south, it's low in the southern end and high in the north. And we just don't have the amount of fill to fill these areas up. So we've got to think about how we're going to restore these areas. And we've got to think about the mix of subtidal, tidal, freshwater, transitional upland habitats we could have here. It's 10,000 acres here for restoration. We also got to think about what's it going to look like over the next 100 years, and we've got to do it soon, because the sooner we start working on these issues, the more likely they are to succeed. So in thinking about this, we've also been thinking about how the highway would fit into this, which acts as a constraint. You can see this red line at the bottom. It acts as a constraint across the whole of the connections between the baylands and the bay. And so we've been working with MTC and the Caltrans, suggesting how big the connections between the bay need to be, how much pile causeway there needs to be to allow the marshes to evolve and change, but also to give them a sense so that they can build a safe design which can accommodate this future landscape. At the moment, this is all agricultural fields. In the future, it'll be marsh. It'll be 10,000 acres of marsh, and it'll be 10,000 acres, and there'll be subtidal, and there'll be transitional zones. And we've got to make these pieces work together. So we're giving them forewarning. This is how the landscape will look. You need to design a road that will fit with that and will allow it to evolve and allow it to change. So bridges need to be bigger. The road and everything needs to be raised, and it needs to allow the marshes to change. So let's move from the natural pieces to the nature-based. These are features which are built specifically to emulate those processes. And so if we, in this case, we could have a kind of a hybrid where we need to have we know we need to have a levee at the back. We've often drawn the line in the sand around the bay for between community and the natural environment. That's very common, and it's very difficult to move that line because people are built right up to the edge of it. And what we need to think about is what do we need to do between the levee and the open bay to make the things work better. And so we can restore marshes, we can manage the mud flats, but we've also built things like ecotone levees or slopes, more gentle slopes between a steep flood risk management levee and the marshes to provide more space to more areas where marshes can accommodate, to provide upland habitat, which has been lost a lot around the bay. And so an example of this is, if you look up at the the picture at the top, that's China Camp, and that shows one of the few places where we have a transition between a natural upland and a marsh. And at the bottom, there's an idea about, what a role of a horizontal levee or an ecotone slope would do, where you have the levee in place. It does this flood risk management protection. It stops the stillwater flooding into the community. But in front of it, you built this longer slope, a transition between the marsh and the levee. And so this provides a really good habitat element to add. However, of course, you're adding more fill, you're adding more expense to this. So we have to justify where and how much and the places of the role of these additional fill if you're looking in the bigger project. What is their benefit beyond a simple slope, and how much do we need and where do we need it? So kind of comparing the two, the picture at the top is Alviso. It's a traditional 3-to-1 levee. So it's for every foot you go up, it goes 3 feet out. And below is Sears Point in the North Bay, a recent restoration, where there's a much longer slope in there, 10-to-1, 20-to-1. So it's a much bigger type of levee, but it provides more habitat value, and this has been taken into account by Bcdc's more recent changes in how they view fill and how we view fill as a benefit with rising seas, and how that needs to be can allow accommodating a more resilient shoreline in this area. And to step on beyond that is thinking about using these slopes as well as not just for topography, but allowing changing the hydrology of these areas. And so this is the Oraloma horizontal levee experiment, which is trying out ideas of how you might introduce water to the back of the to the marshes. So it provides that long elevation slope, but also provides a suitable hydrology for maintaining native species, and provide ways to polish the treated wastewater to create better water quality. So these are all ideas that are piloted, that are coming out. They're building upon our 40 years of understanding of how you build restorations, and it's built upon our understanding of how the bay works. But each of these is trying to address this, the new problems we're foreseeing as sea level rises, changes, and as climate changes. So the last piece I'd like to talk about is about nature-based processes. We talked about the features. I mean, we go along with the grader and we build that and we walk away from it. And ideally, that's what we would do in many cases. That's what we've been doing with the marshes. Once we've built the thing, or restored the flows, then hopefully nature and the bay will continue to provide sediment and water and allow those marshes to evolve and change. But what we're seeing is in the future, two things. One is that we know we've cut off a lot of supplies of sediment. We've made a lot of hydraulic changes to the bay, and we need to start thinking about how to restore those. And in the future, as in the environment, as climate changes and it changes more rapidly, we're going to need to help provide more help to those certain of those areas. We need to think about how we're going to supply sediment and water to these restored sites and the ones we've already restored and the ones we want to restore in the future. How are we going to maintain those processes? So there's some ideas about thin layer placement. On the left is at Seal Beach as an experiment, often done in Louisiana's, but this is the first one in California of spraying mud onto marshes. Probably pretty good for if you've got a specific hole to fill up, but it's very difficult to control. It does tend to fill in a lot of channels, and does create it takes some time for the marshes to respond. But there are some thoughts about how to use that. There's on the right side is sort of similar, but it's at the back of the marshes, and we do this by accident. This is the pictures from Sonoma Baylands restoration in the 1990s. And this is where dredge material was hydraulically slurried into the marshes, and it created some of the coarser material falls out more rapidly than the finer material, and it creates alluvial fans naturally. And so those over time in the bottom picture have vegetated, and these provide elevation at the back of the marshes. And this is an idea that has been proposed for both in Marsh and in Richardson Bay and other places. Can we use this to put material in? We've also looked at how to maybe add material more naturally to large marshes, and this is an ideas that would work with the Corps of Engineers, who have a pilot project in place called strategic placement, where there's some ideas, 3 different ideas we looked at. The top one on the top is about spraying marshes, like we did before. The one in the middle was placing sediment into channels, but we want to be careful about that. We don't want to block the channel as much as get it onto the marsh itself. And the one at the bottom is actually placing it onto the mudflat or the shallow subtidal and allowing waves to naturally resuspend and carry that sediment into the marshes or onto the other parts of the mudflat. So gradually increasing the amount of sediment that's available generally in the area to allow the marshes to keep up. So this would be like a maintenance as opposed to a creation of a restoration. And so those are the kind of ideas that are being thought to be piloted over the next couple of years in the Bay, trying to make much better use of the dredge material that's available, but also better ways to place it into the Bay. And another idea is making these connections more permanent. So this is down at Pond 8 in Sunnyvale and Calabasas Creek. And this is actually, the creeks down there have been rerouted, as you see on the left-hand side, to go around the salt ponds and to avoid them. But now, with the salt ponds being restored to marshes, there's opportunities to put the creeks back into the marshes, allow the sediment to go back into those salt ponds to create and maintain those marshes. So this is a Valley Water project, and the South Bay Salt Ponds project. So this is a way to reconnect those processes to make the whole marshes more sustainable. So I'm just going to pass, I got 3 more slides talking about, one is about space. And all of these different types of discussions about reconnecting processes and restoring and fitting in nature-based features, they all need space. And we all need to think about reimagining the sort of the cross-section or the plan shapes of the bay, connecting from the mudflat all the way up to the watersheds. There are places where we've been kind of thinking about this, but more generally around the bay, that would be a huge change that we would have on the shoreline. If we can reconnect the watersheds to the mudflats, it would greatly benefit the wildlife, but it also benefit the movement of sediment and water and through the bay. The second one is about time. That we usually in our restorations think about time as starting from when we breach, and when we breach is when we've had the permits, and when we have the permits is also when we got the money, we can go on. However, time is not necessarily on our side. The clock is ticking that we have. We have existing marshes which can maintain some amount of sea level rise, but at some point they're going to have an issue in terms of how much water they can actually how much sea level rise they can manage. So this graph here is an attempt to lay out that sea level, the changes we might expect to see in our adaptation as sea level rises. So on the top, we have sea level rise in the amount of feet. And the present guidance is, expect up to 3.5 feet or so by the end of the century. So that's kind of gives you a bit of a time scale. And then on here in the top bar, I've marked the existing marsh, and that can probably accommodate several inches of more sea level rise. But at some point, we're going to have to start augmenting and adding new features to that, maybe recharging that putting that sediment onto the marshes to help them raise more quickly, or adding beaches to slow down erosion. But those kind of things, they take time to plan, to manage. So there, I put this yellow bar in the beginning, which is sort of the lead time. Getting water, doing your planning, raising your money, getting the permits in place. And if you're going to do that, you need a decision point and say, hey, we need to start doing that. And you can see the decision point is pretty close to today. If we're going to get things in place and working, which are these blue bars, in time to accommodate the higher rates of sea level rise. Along the slopes to allow the marshes to move around. And so that means you're going to have to start building those longer ecotone slopes and so on. That's going to take maybe longer to build and acquire. You've got to acquire some land and things like that. So you've got to start thinking what plan B will be. And then plan C is, if sea level rise isn't going to stop at 2100, it's not going to stop at the end of the graph, it's going to continue. And so we've got to think about how continually readjust the shoreline to accommodate these higher and higher sea levels, and to give space and time for these marsh restorations. So there's the adaptation pathways, they would call it. It requires you to keep kind of every so often reassessing where we are. We don't know exactly happening. There's some uncertainty about rates of sea level rise, but thinking about when things need to occur, when we need to be nature-based features, when we need to augment natural features. These are all important pieces we need to think about. And then the final piece is is about cost, about resources to do this work. The thing in the past, we've tended to have a restoration project going in one place at a particular time, driven by its own timetable. And there's been another, say the South Bay salt ponds. And then there's been another project further in the North Bay that's running on its own timetable as well. What we're finding now is there's a lot of big projects, a lot of big discussions about the shoreline driven by sea level rise, but they're all happening simultaneously. And they're all big ticket items in terms of both the cost to plan and to permit and to construct, but also the cost of fill, the amount of fill that's required, because fill gives you elevation. And elevation is what we need for these deeply subsided areas, and elevation is what we need as sea level rises. So we need fill to change the elevation, and that's usually, firstly, the biggest, most costly part of the project, because fill, even though it's dirt cheap, is we're using a lot of dirt. It usually also represents the biggest impact as well in moving it and placing it, in terms of trucks moving around and in terms of actually burying and changing the landscape. So we've got to think about those costs in there, and that there's a finite supply of it in the bay. We have dredge material, but you can't use dredge material for all the purposes you need. Yeah, we have material from construction sites and moving that, but that depends upon how much construction is going on. So there's a whole economics of fill that we need to consider, and also the economics of the competition between resources in general, because of this response that we need to think about things simultaneously as sea level rises. That's, I think, to me, is going to be one of the biggest challenges. And we've got to think about our restorations. We've got to think about our natural and nature-based adaptations in the context that we are probably going to be resource limited, and that we need to be careful in where we choose to place measures and elements and restorations in the place where we get the best benefit from them for the environment, for the ecology, but also for the urban estuary itself as well. So with four really good resources that I would suggest that you look at. The first is understanding sea level rise and understanding the uncertainties and understanding why projections are made as they are, and understanding that the science is continually evolving and getting better. And that's to look at this California sea level rise guidance from the OPC. That's online. It's a really good resource, and it's written for use by communities to understand sea level rise and what the risks are associated with them. The second one I'd look at is the Bcdc Flood Explorer, because that provides you with maps about the bay and allows you to investigate what ifs for different amounts of sea level rise and what could be affected by them. I would also look at the Habitat Goals Update, because that gives you a really good blueprint of the future for the bay in terms of restoration, the ecological goals that we have. And then lastly, I suggest you look at the Adaptation Atlas, because that's starting to look at how can we adapt to achieve the Bayland goals and achieve our goals we have for our built community in a more natural way and a softer way for the future.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Fascinating.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeremy Lowe. So there was a couple questions that came in during the video, and what the last one had to do, and I don't know if Eileen could answer this, is how do they, when they are moving around this fill in the bay to create marshes, how do they ensure that it isn't contaminated?
That's a always a good question, and they have to test it. Any fill that goes in the bay has got to meet standards of quality, and there's a standard that the Corps of Engineers has, and there's one under the that the Water Board has under the Clean Water Act. So that any kind of mud that's, or any that would be added to the bay at any place has to be tested before they could use it. So that's yeah, it's an important question, because that's protecting the quality of the bay, but it also is running up the cost of restoration right now, because it's getting harder to find clean fill.
Good. Okay. And then there was another question about what, and I think this had to do with a particular figure in Sonoma County. So we may not be able to be that specific, but what was the subsided area used for? The part that's upland of the levee. And I would say that's typically used for agriculture and other possible infrastructure. Like I know some of the power towers and things like that are in subsided polder areas. Do you have anything to add?
I would say that if the levee is part of it, if the area was diked off from the bay, the subsidence back there is just probably based on subsided marsh that dried up, and then they used it for agriculture or various, if not as a salt pond. So that there's a lot of reasons that it became subsided from that kind of action. So that's something that you might want to look at when you get out around the salt ponds, because you'll see if they haven't been reached out in the middle. If you can see it, it's lower, it's compacted.
Good. Well, I think we're going to get into breakout rooms here. And so again, just reiterating what we talked about last time, this was an opportunity to write the city council members of Richmond about Point Malate. So they'll give you a chance to read what you've written. And then we'll get a little bit of an update after from Virginia. So we'll start the breakout rooms.
Come out of there. We had more to
do.
I know.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. It's so hard.
James, could you finish your thought for us
Oh,
in your group?
pay attention to your city's priority setting sessions that are usually early in the year, so you'll know on what they will be working and concentrating for the rest of the year, and then match your environmental agenda with what they've already said. And you can refer, you said your priority was this, this, and this. If you bring it back to their own words, you've got a really powerful echo to them.
I agree. As soon as they said biodiversity was one of their main goals, we've been using that for everything.
Did they publish
trees? You know.
Did they publish the outcomes of that priority setting meeting?
Yes, yes, they do.
It's on their. It's on the Alliance website.
James, they should be online somewhere, right?
Yes, they are. I know for my city, San Jose, it's actually pretty easy to find by looking at their meeting agendas. And you can see who voted for what. So if there's one particular city council member who really consistently voted for an issue that is of your concern, that should be your floor manager. That should be your first contact.
Mm-hmm.
Like your ally, like Smitty said. Yeah.
I have a question, Susan.
Yep.
We didn't get to hear Elise's letter, and I don't know if she can post it in chat or what can we, if she can, I don't know, but you know, she wanted to share and the others wanted to see what she wrote, so it was like going, but then
She could send it to Susan and Susan could share it with everyone.
you know, so
Yeah, we could do that.
if that's okay.
Elise wrote a really good letter last time, I remember. So
Well,
yeah, I can share it.
Well, we had some really good ones in my group.
Are these letters going to be sent?
So one thing, well, I wanted Virginia to give us a little bit of an update. So I will be sending everybody an email that has the email addresses of the city council members. And we really encourage you to submit them. I heard 2 really great ones in my breakout room. And also, I didn't ask you to do this last time, but I would like you to CC both Virginia and me on your submissions, just so we can keep track of what's going on. And I know this is tough, but if you did write one to the East Palo Alto City Council, if you could forward that or forward it or copy me on what you wrote, that would be great. So I don't know, I was going to ask Virginia for her update.
Yeah, great. And I was just reading in the chat the Giants game updates. That's still okay. All right, but back to Point Melade, to the question of whether to actually send these to the city council. Yes, please. It would be a tragedy if you wrote something compelling and then it never got to them. So please do. And I hope that Jim and Andreas's presentation, gosh, was that just last week? Really was a demonstration about how complex these campaigns can be and how there is not just one target of the advocacy. So in this instance, Richmond City Council is one of the targets. Another key target is the East Bay Regional Park District Board. And we have gotten Jim has reached out to ask with another specific ask for the class, and that is for folks who were moved by that presentation, who visited and realized, wow, this really needs to be saved, to write to the board members of the East Bay Regional Park District. And the simple ask is prioritize this as an acquisition for the park district, make this a park. And having there's funding that's being lined up. This is something that you can do. It's been in the master plan for the park district before, so I think it's a very reasonable ask. Susan has some sample language from Jim, as well as the contact information for all the park district board members, and she's going to send that out to everyone after class. So that's another great advocacy action that you can take between classes. And then City Council, East Bay Park District Board, we just got an update from yet another agency just today. I heard about this, which is that SunCal, which is the proposed developer for Point Malate, the housing at Point Malate, the luxury housing, had applied to the Bay Conservation and Development Commission to change Point Malate's designation in the Bay Plan from parkland to residential, so that they could actually go ahead with building. They had taken this before the board of that commission a month or two ago, and the board, having heard from advocates like all of us, asked for that decision to be postponed. Now we heard just today, in the last day, that SunCal has pulled their application from BCDC, which is good news. We don't know why they pulled their application really, and we do know that they intend to reapply in the spring, but it shows that that there's pressure on them. And so this is BCDC commissioners, that's another target for this advocacy. And when it comes before them in the spring again, we want to make sure that they are clear that there are bad environmental costs to this project, that that this should be bad effects on the Bay, which is their mandate. So anyway, that was just a little good news update, and another ask. I see Sue raise the hand.
I wonder, Virginia, since you were with the Sierra Club and you know about this, if I could send my email to you.
Yeah, Sue, we were in the breakout room together. Sue, I'd be, do you mean to look at and give you feedback on before you send it?
And actually, I went to the Alliance group, the people that showed us around their website, which was very helpful, explained how to address the letter and to the mayor for this and the planning commission for this, and they meet on what nights, and following them like that, I'm very capable of doing, but I don't feel comfortable. My question is, should I go into more detail or just leave it as is? Anyways, you're informed, and I would like your feedback before I send it to anybody.
Yes, absolutely. Very happy to provide feedback to anybody if you want to shoot me your draft comments in an email.
Email address in the chat. I'll just copy it down and send it to you. Thank you very much.
So there was a question whether you should submit to the mayor as well, and I would say definitely you should submit to the mayor as well.
Yeah, they asked us to submit to the mayor.
Yeah,
they say if you have a public comment, submit it to the mayor. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, it's Sierra Club. Good. So that's a good email.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Virginia, for that. Update. And so again, along with the city council forward information to you. So James Edgars is here. He's our Loma Prieta chapter director, and he has a short presentation to share some valuable expertise of his.
All right. Hi, all. I was asked to speak about persuasive writing and speaking, and actually I created a 15-hour course for the British Embassy on this topic, but we'll try to shrink it down to something more manageable for this class. And so let me see, share my screen, pull up my documents, get my and slideshow. And I'll come back to share screen. Since I can never see what you're seeing, I just asked for somebody to give me thumbs up to let me know that you can see my desktop. Thank you, Eileen. All right. So one of the most important keys to being persuasive is to realize that although emotional appeals to elected officials might be great for reality TV and for some media channels, what the elected officials really need is facts that they can present not only to their staff, to the city manager, to other city council members, but also to their constituents. They've really got to have the facts. That's what's going to influence them. They might be persuaded by an emotional appeal to go look for the facts, but you're going to be much more effective if you actually present the facts. So it's a very simple structure that it can be very effective for organizing your presentation, both in writing and speaking. And I would say organizing your speaking should first be organizing your writing. It's never a problem for you to go in to speak with your document already written. That's actually what you should have. If you're able to memorize it so that it comes out without looking at your notes, that's great, but the writing should precede even your speaking. And so I developed many years ago what I call a 3.8 paragraph structure. If any of you have heard about this before, I'd be happy to receive a note from you because it is now licensed to Cambridge University Press and is being used all around the world by the British Council and the British Embassy. And why is it called a 3.8 paragraph structure? Well, because a real paragraph, and many times when you see things written in popular press, you'll see 2 sentences. That is not a paragraph. A real paragraph develops one idea. And it develops one idea, I would say, through 3 points. Why 3 points? Well, you can use 2, you can use 4, but the telephone industry almost a century ago did the biggest research about human memory. And why do we have area codes that are 3 digits? Why were the phone numbers 80 years ago something like BR278? Is because the phone companies with this great expansive research found out that humans can actually hold about 3 points in their head at one time. Even your social security number, like mine is 415-290-676. Well, I didn't just speak it the way that it's written on my social security card. The US government had to change it to something like 415-29-0676 in order to avoid the copyright that the telephone companies had. So even the US government is still using that idea of 3 digits, 3 digits, 3 digits. So take your one idea, develop it with 3 points, and develop that through 8 sentences. Why 8 sentences? I'll show you here. Your first sentence should be your introductory sentence, and that's going to include your main point and your main idea, and then develop through 3 points. And then very simple scheme. Sentence number 2, your first point, give a factual statement, follow that up with evidence. And the greater the authority of your evidence, the better. If you're speaking about health and you can quote Johns Hopkins University, that's fantastic. If you're speaking about mammal behavior and you can quote the Journal of Mammalogy, that's fantastic. If you're speaking about the influence of salt on a diet and you quote your mother, well, I'm not going to argue with that, but it's probably not the same level of authority as the director of the CDC. So think about the level of authority of your evidence. So you just go first point, give a factual statement, follow it up with a sentence of evidence. Second point, factual statement, follow it up with evidence, all the way through the 3 points. And in the summary sentence, you essentially repeat your introductory sentence, but in a different way. So it has a different emphasis. Now, for example, introductory sentence should include the main idea in 3 points, starting with a factual statement. So, missed here my introductory sentence. My introductory sentence would be that, for example, bats are critical to humans because of their ecosystem services of pest control, pollination, and fertilization. So first point, the second sentence is you want to follow it up with a factual statement. Factual statement is insectivorous bats are the major predator, night-flying agricultural pest, and thereby protect human jobs, food, and health. That's a factual statement. Anybody can make this statement. What's important is how can you prove it? How can you follow it up with evidence? So next is, okay, I can say in 2012, an article in the journal Nature, very respected, highly respected journal, actually gave this information that in the US, bats save farmers up to 53 billion, that's billion with a B, $billion. That gets the attention of the elected officials. Authoritative research that talks about money for jobs and health. Follow it up with a second point. That's an important and sometimes exclusive pollinator of many of the most important and essential human crops. That's a statement anybody could make. What's important is you follow it up with the facts. Okay, so Southeast Asia, nectivorous bats are the primary pollinator of wild bananas, cocoa, mangoes, incredibly important agricultural crops, and they are the exclusive pollinator of tequila agave and the exclusive pollinator of the most important food crop in all of Southeast Asia, durian fruit. Now, if any of you have experienced durian fruit, you know that the smell is not attractive, but the nutritional value of the fruit makes it the most important food crop in all of Southeast Asia. So imagine if you wiped out bats, you had no more pollination, you're going to cause a huge disruption in Southeast Asian diets. Followed up with the third point, bat guano, the essential, the critical nature of bat guano, and actually historically helping with human agriculture and currently very important to subsistence and organic farmers. What's your proof of that? Anybody can say it. What's your proof? 2018 study, the scientific journal Agroecology, looks at things like improved yields by 22% and a higher return on investment for subsistence farmers. So you've already got 3 points. You make statements, you give the facts to follow it up. That's something that an elected official can check the sources, and they can carry it to their colleagues to help convince their colleagues of what you're trying to say. And then follow it up with your summary sentence, essentially just restating your main idea with the 3 points. But one of the simple techniques is to reverse it. So instead of the introductory sentence saying bats provide, then in your summary sentence say, point back to humans. Humans are vitally dependent upon what bats provide. Very simple structure, very, very powerful. And if you want to write something more than one paragraph, it's easy. You can take the 3 points of your first paragraph, and each of those points can become its own paragraph following. Go back to the first point that I said. In the factual statement, major predator of night-flying agricultural pests, thereby protecting human jobs, food, and health. That can become a whole paragraph on its own. So you've set yourself up kind of like a pyramid, starting at the top with the main idea, followed by 3 points. If you need to write more, you have the opportunity or the desire to write more, then each of those 3 points can become its own paragraph. And actually, I've taught many master's degree students and PhD students, and they use this structure to write a 40-page thesis or a 200-page dissertation by following the same structure. Very, very powerful. Remember, the elected officials need facts to be convinced, and they need facts to help them convince their colleagues, whether it's on city council, whether it's an elected official. I use this same method in speaking with Assembly Member Ash Cholera, use the same method speaking with state senators. Use this method. They really appreciate the concentration of the information. Don't need a lot of flowery style, concentration of information, and with the facts. So now, for this particular example, There were many other points I could have included about the how bats are essential to humans. Those can be used for other paragraphs. I decided in the first paragraph to use the things that would be most important to elected officials, things about local jobs, local health, and local food sources. But other paragraphs can follow with these other ideas if you have the time and if your target audience is interested in those. They go back to the 3.8 paragraph structure. 3.8 meaning 3 points developed through 8 sentences. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Again, it's licensed by Cambridge University Press, so maybe you've seen it before, but I'm happy to share it for any of you to use. And next, I would like to introduce to you the our chapter, well, an idea of how, if you have an idea, let me see, okay, make sure now that I've changed documents, can anybody give me a thumbs up to tell me whether you can see the text document that I've just risen? Nope, okay. Then I'm probably gonna have to go back.
Do stop share and then screen share again.
I just have to change the screen share to a different doc. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, through your chapter, when you have a conservation idea or when you have something you want to share, especially if there's a campaign that you want to have broader contact with a particular elected official, if you want to have a broader contact than just yourself, then speak to your chapters, speak to your chapter leaders. I would say the first, if it's a conservation subject, first speak to your chapter's conservation chair, and they'll help you find the conservation subcommittee that fits best to your particular topic. For example, in our chapter, we had someone who was very interested in pesticides. They brought it to our conservation committee, and now our conservation committee has a subcommittee on pesticides. So that's the way. Contact your chapter, and each of our 3 chapters have their own conservation committees, have their own communication channels. I'm using this just as an example from the Loma Prieta chapter to show you the different ways that your chapter can communicate information. One way is through Facebook. For example, our chapter has about 2,500 followers on Facebook. Use Twitter. You can use Instagram, YouTube, and the chapter newsletter, chapter calendar for events. The Loma Prieta chapter was the first chapter to actually start using Spotify to share environmental messages. And then each of those different communication channels has their own best use. So Facebook is best for some things, Twitter is better for other things, Instagram is better for other things. So usually I find that volunteers start with a message and ask how they can best communicate it. Sometimes, more rarely, they'll say, I've got this message of this length, what's the best way to communicate? So if it's a 50-word content, there are some better ways. If it's a 500-word content, you're not going to share it. You should not share that through social media. That's far too long. You're not going to get very much engagement. So think first about the message you want to present, and then think about the communication channel of your chapter that would be best to communicate that. And I'm just letting you know that there are a variety of communication channels, but if you would like to get a message through your chapter's communication channels, check with your chapter staff. If your chapter has a designated communication person, maybe that's who to contact. But I would say first is contact your chapter director, because they're going to have a broader view of what the chapter priorities are, what the chapter resources are, as well as what the chapter communication channels are. But this is let you know that there are a lot of different channels that can be used for different audiences. And those are places that I'd say one of our biggest challenges in communicating through those channels is that we need more content. So if you're really interested in a particular issue or if you're just really interested in using, if you're already adept at using a particular communication channel, contact your chapter director or staff and find out how your interest and your skills can already help support what the chapter is doing, or even better advance your particular interest. So that's an example just from the Sierra Club chapter, but remember that each of your chapters has their own channels. So please don't hesitate to contact them. And all of our chapters, I can say, are always looking for more volunteers to help with communication and with content development. So thank you for your time. If there's time for any questions, I'll be happy to take those also, as well as any comments from our friends from the Redwood chapter and San Francisco Bay chapter. And both those documents will be shared with you also. So you didn't have to take, I should have told you in the beginning, you don't have to take notes, and you don't have to speed memorize.
So there was a question in the chat from Mike. Do you have any modifications or suggestions on talking to unelected officials, like staff people?
No, I think speaking to anybody, doesn't matter if it's an agency head, if it's an elected official, or if it's their staff, I'd say still, all of them are still looking for the facts as succinctly as possible and with authoritative evidence to support your cause.
Any other questions for James?
Samantha asked, when you speak to City Council, do you email your comments to and link studies you mentioned? Yes, I do. Yep, I always provide them with links, and here I just gave you one example for each, but often I include multiple examples, sometimes so much that I'll actually add I'll include the best link for each point, but then include an appendix for more examples in case they want to read. And I've been surprised pleasantly that, for example, there are a couple of city council members in San Jose who are very, very interested in public health and very interested to read articles about how nature can support public health, both in physical health, mental health, academic health, reducing gang violence. They're very interested in those kinds of articles.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Do you provide that before or after you speak usually, the email?
It depends upon the situation. For example, in San Jose, when I know there are several city council members that are really interested in the environmental impact of public health, I send them those articles as soon as I find them, as soon as I see them, whether it's related to something I'm going to present to the city council or not. I send them all those things. So they're never surprised when I present it to the city council. They already know about it. And in a few cases, they've even said, oh, I've already shared this with my colleagues. So I like to present them ahead of time if possible, because one of the best things an elected official ever told me was, give me all the information you can so that I can help convince my colleagues before you come to speak. They said, you really haven't done a good job if we only hear about you in those 2 minutes of comment.
Yeah, that makes sense to kind of already prime them before you speak.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're ready. Yeah.
Well, thank you, James. We really appreciate your time this week, especially this week, because this is the Guardian of Nature's benefit week. So I had sent each of you an email inviting you to the Guardians of Nature benefit for Loma Prieta. That's this Friday from 7 to 8. And I've gotten a couple questions about how to join it. In that email that I sent you, there was a particular individual's email address that you had to respond to. So it's not too late. So if you respond to Justina, then she will get a unique link to you for the event. So if you're still interested.
It'll be a great event. We're so happy that Attorney General Rob Bonta is going to introduce our honoree this year. And we've got several great friends like Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and County Supervisor Joe Simidian that are going to present. I can also tell you that most Sierra Club chapters never receive even one award from Sierra Club National. This year, our chapter received 3 national awards. And all of those are going to be presented at the event also.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I did want to mention one last thing before we say goodbye and go watch the Giants game. Is we're planning to open the outing to any all interested people. I find another outings leader. So if you did not sign up and you are still interested in going, I will send that link around again. So please sign up. We're going to try to, like I said, open it up to all parties.
One question from Steve Goodell, which said, how do you address misinformation or disinformation?
Yeah. I was just about to respond to that, and I'd say with facts, and the higher the authority, the better.
Can my husband attend? Yes, but he needs a separate, you need to send Justina the 2 emails, your email and your
Well,
husband's
unless you're
email.
going to watch on the same screen, right?
True.
So,
Yeah, of course.
So, but we hope you can attend. And so there was another email, or sorry, there was another webinar video we wanted to show. I will give you the link to that. It's on carbon sequestration. It is really good. So I hope you take a look at that. But I'll send you that link in my email that I'm sending out after the class. So thank you all. I appreciate your attendance and participation today. And thanks, Jane. You're almost there. All right.
you.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you.